Welcome to Late to the Know-How. I'm Simon and this is session 2. This week we're going to continue our story, our first quest that we've been given to the party. Before we start that quest, however, I just want to go over some errata, just some rules and updates that I've been working on since the last session. So what I did was I just went through my handwritten notes and have basically codified them onto the computer. So here we have our character generation sheet, how to generate our characters and how to generate our companions and basically how to put them into the stat blocks. I'm starting a list of rule adjustments. So these are things that I'm kind of going to either add in or take out. So at the moment there's common sense lighting. The characters are not really going to have dark vision, but some creatures will. So the characters will need to be aware of lighting situations in dark places, but I'm not going to be tracking torches or anything like that. But they, if they in a cave for a long period of time, they might have to start being a bit more aware of what their torch situation might be. There's not going to be any ammo tracking. Again, it's going to be that same common sense application. And then attacks of opportunity, I'm going to remove from combat. Some monsters and character classes like fighters may have a special attack of opportunity action, but I'm kind of going to be removing attacks of opportunity. I'm going to try and make it a bit more tactical, a little bit more using flanking and being prone and stuff like that, which is very prominent in Pathfinder 2nd edition. So I'm going to try and mangle some of those rules in. Now, our Oracle system consisted of rolling D6, and then there was a whole bunch of other dice as well, which there's too many dice. So what I did was I've made it into a D10 system. So I've expanded the options for the Oracle. I've expanded the complication results and the Oracle how outcomes to D10s. It gives me more options, but it may end up being too many options. And if that's the case, well, then I might pare it back to a D8 system or something. I have expanded the inspiration tables to 100. So that's a D100. I do like percentile dice. I think they're kind of cool. So I think I'm going to try and stick with D10, D100s for the oracles and for that kind of tables. And we'll just see how they go. Now, I spent some time also going over some Hex Crawl rules. If you're into hex crawling and things like that, you'll know that there's a plethora of rules already out there. And what I've done is I read through a whole bunch of them, tweaked them, added in some extra bits that I hadn't seen, manipulated them a bit. And then, and have written it all down. So we'll go over this before we start our actual hex crawl. We'll go over these rules and I'll explain what I'll be doing. Also, one of the other few things that I've done was I've just written down some combat flow notes, which is essentially D&D combat, and the general RPG type combat, initiative, movement, action, reactions, bonus actions, rinse and repeat. I've just written them down into more of into a flow, just so it makes it easy for when I'm GMing and playing by myself. And then the other thing that I've done is I've just created a monster action table, which just lets me randomize what the monsters are going to do, so that I'm not kind of trying to remove that bias from my desire for the characters to do well and have them so that the monsters are a little bit more under their own control. So it's basically a strategy and a targeting system. The monsters can then decide what they want to do. And that again uses a D100 for those kinds of things. Now the next thing I did was I took my original large journal that I had, and I found it very awkward to use on the table. So what I did was I converted it across to these A5 notebooks. they're spiral bound, so they're a bit easier to, you can write on them a lot easier. They're a bit smaller. And yeah, they just make things a bit easier for me to write stuff down. I essentially just copied the notes that were in the big journal across. So there's the starting zone backstories of the village, the forest, the druidic enclave and school, the character backgrounds, Lena, Warby, and Sailorthil, and then this is their first quest. And yeah, I'll just be using these as notes. At one point I thought what I might try to do is novelize a little bit the adventure, but I think in the end that may be a bit too much work. So I think just doing dot point notes and just sort of doing the story that way is going to be just as good for me, I think. Then what I did was I grabbed one of they've got the same notebooks, but just with this dotted grid, and I've just converted it into a hex grid journal. So we've got our first hex, which is our Kilvington. That's our little village here. And all I'll do is I'll just redraw the hex map as we go, and note anything of interest in that hex, and the hex number, which is the number that the hex is from the Graven Guild, the Hexton Hills hex set. So that way I know that if I want to recreate it, I just have to pull out the appropriate tile. Now also last week I created Ordway Langley, which was our NPC, our druidic NPC leader, and his mini was okay. It was just one that I'd found and I just pulled it out of the collection of minis. But what I decided to do was reprint him, and I painted him up in the same colour scheme as our adventurers. So he now looks like this, if I can get it to focus. There we go. So he's now a bit more sort of in tune with our other characters. So they now look like they're part of the same team, and hopefully we'll see more of Ordway. There's at least one more time where the party will be coming back, if they survive, to report the quest results. So yeah, we'll hopefully see more of him. Alrighty, let's go over these Hex Crawl rules that I generated. So they're fairly simple. You're basically just using the pre-existing biome of the current hex to help you determine what the next hex will be. So that way you're not just going straight from a lush jungle, next hextile is dry desert. So hopefully it's a gradual change of biome. So let's start at the top. Starting off, we've got some direction tools. So this will just help us determine which way the characters might be heading if they're lost, or if there's incoming baddies, which direction they're coming from. And it includes things like, because the hex itself only has 6 sides, you've basically got to decide it'll be a north, south, northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest direction for travel. So there's those options, and then there's some extra options for multiple directions if there's bandits, say, coming in from multiple sides. And then there's a special one for things like coming directly underneath or from the top, or if that's not applicable, we just roll again. Now the hex size there's 2 kinds of sizes generally that I've found, and that's a 6-mile hex or a 24-mile hex. Now I'm going to be using a 24-mile hex, and the reason is I kind of only have limited desk space, so I want the one hex to represent as big as the area as possible, And in 24 miles, that's how much a travel on, on standard roads and things like that, good terrain, that the party can move within a day. And a change of 24 miles over a couple of hexes using the terrain type change should hopefully bring a slow change of biome for us and have it kind of interesting. So the next thing that we do is we determine the terrain type, and it uses a percentage of what the current terrain is and then adds on similar terrain, a transitional type of terrain, and then a completely different type of terrain. So if our current biome is grasslands, for example, we roll the percentage dice. 60% it's the same biome. 25% is woodlands and hills biome. 10% is a transitional biome, so there might be a swamp or a coast, for example, or a desert. And a completely different one is mountains and tundra. So, you have to sort of work something into the story about why suddenly you've got this mountain popping out of the middle of a forest or a tropical forest, for example. Well, there's real life things, real life scenarios of that happening in the world. Like Kilimanjaro rises out of the middle of the Serengeti. So that kind of stuff can be written into the story, and it can be quite interesting. Now, after you determine the terrain type, there's some features and events that can occur on that hex. So that you've got things like a natural feature, like just a strange sort of growth, rocky outcropping. There might be a settlement. There might be ruins. There might be some sort of mystical thing. And with the features and events, I've got it so that you roll on the complication chain if you roll a 10, so that way it increases the complication without consulting the oracles, just to speed things along for interesting changes. Now, the next thing is some events. And the events are like the features, essentially, but maybe a little bit less physical. You might have a hostile encounter. There might be a hazard. Maybe there's a storm coming. There's some features which can take you back to a village or a whatever. There's a sign, so there might be tracks in the snow or something or other. There's an uneventful day, and then there's an adjustment of the complication dice. Now, depending on the terrain, there's an expected travel speed. So this expected travel speed is something that you could roll at the beginning of the day, that you can let your party say, the party should be able to move through this tile with one day. But depending on what happens with the expected travel, something might happen. There might be a delay. And as the GM side of things, you can incorporate that into your story. Then there's a resting phase. So that basically is at night when the party camp. And it's essentially a scale of super duper rest. You get some bonuses, or there's a disturbed rest. Maybe there's an attack by night creatures or something like that. And then there's some, and that's it. That's the hex crawl system. We're not going to try and get too fancy with it, but I have added in some extra stuff, so to speak, and that's things like I've got some weather things. If I end up adding in some weather to go in, if I want to make the weather a little bit more impactful on the journey. And then on the last parts are just some suggested events depending on the terrain type. So if you're in let's pick one of these ones here. If you're in swamps or marshlands, You roll a d10. If you say you roll on the events and features table and you get, oh, there's a feature, there's something here, you can then roll on here. And even though there's 10 of them, there's enough to give me a little bit of an idea about what things I can sort of introduce into that sort of encounter. Yeah, so just some extra information for our hex crawl side of things. And yeah, we'll see how we go. We'll start off with at Kilvington, which is going to be our center point. And then from Kilvington, we've basically rolled. I rolled somewhere. I can't remember where, but I know that at some point we rolled that we were going to head out to the north. So I've made the orientation of this hex tile north-south. And because we're in the middle of this forest, the first hex tile that we go into will be a forest. And this is a forest tile with a road going through it. And I might reprint this and paint it in the color scheme of these so that it matches in. But for the moment, we're just going to use this. So we're not going to worry about rolling on the hex crawl table to determine the next hex that our party encounters. We're basically going to start from our starting point and walk into the forest, but on a track of some sort, on a reasonably well-maintained road or track to get to the community. Alrighty, I've had a technical issue with the camera and the setup for the arena view. So what I've done is I've just changed the angle, so you'll get a more of a low-down view of the play area. The problem will be that you won't get a top-down view of the notes and things that I'm writing, but what I'll do is I'll take some images and just stick them up on the screen for anything that's relevant. Now also, before we continue leaving the community, what I've done is I've just set up, basically here is where our current hex is. I might move that off, I don't know, put a little image on the side of the video or something perhaps. But I've also got our 2 complication dice ready to go. So our D8, which is just our minor complication, and the starting D12 for our world possible major complication. And we'll roll on those when we ask Oracle questions or if the Oracle directs us to make those kind of rolls. Now, before our characters leave the village, well, the village is going to see them leaving. They're going to know because it's a relatively tight-knit community. The school and everything with all the druids and the teachers and possibly other students and villagers, they all basically know what's going on. So they're going to be watching the party leave the community. So what we'll do is we'll roll on our Oracle table. We'll ask a question, roll on the Oracle table, just to see if anyone notices them leaving and has anything to say to them as they're leaving. Alrighty, so the question we'll ask is, does anybody intercept the party on their way out of the community? So we'll roll, and it's, because it's rolled off the screen, it's a 10, and that's extreme on the Oracle. So basically we can roll again twice and combine the oracles and advance the complication dice by 1. So straight away something is increasing the chaos of the situation. Alrighty, so we'll move the complication dice up to the next dice, and the way the Oracle is working is that on a 1 or a 9 on a D10, that will advance the complication dice, the complication chain, if we roll a 1 on those dice. But with an extreme Oracle result, we're moving the complication dice regardless. Now, because I'm using two complication dice, a major and a minor, I'm actually going to advance both of them. Because an extreme Oracle result means that there is stuff going on in the world behind the scenes that is going to affect the current quest and like ongoing quests. So let's just advance those 2 dice first, and then we'll go on with what the next lot part of the Oracle. So we're going from a D12 down to a D10, and we're going from a D8 down to a D6 for the minor chain. That's basically how the complication chains work. So if the D6, if another Oracle result comes up that will advance the minor one, then it will go to a D4, and then if it comes up again, we roll the D4, and that will determine if there's a change in the complication or not. And now, but for what we're doing, this is all we need to do. The extreme result says to roll twice and combine the results. So it might get a little bit confusing, but what we'll do is we'll check what the results come up with, and if I might have to have a bit of a think about it, but we'll see what happens, basically. Bear with me. All right, so the first one is a 2, which says no. So no one really comes up. And the second one is a 5, which is uncertain. So it looks like the only thing that really occurred was that people, like the villagers, the community, the druids and stuff, knew what they were doing. They're sort of going to be sent on their way. They maybe said, bye, see you later, have a good journey, blah, blah, blah. Say hello to Fred at, the next town or whatever. But basically no one's really coming up to them. They're kind of, they're ready. They know that they've got an important mission to go on, and they're not going to halt them. But because of the original extreme Oracle result, something's happening in the background that's going to affect them a little bit quicker than what might ordinarily have affected them. All right, so what we'll do now is we'll advance our hex to the next hex, which is just the forest, because we've basically said we're going to make the next hex just part of the forest so the characters can get out. And we'll just do a normal little hex crawl through that forest. Alrighty, so let's first swap our tile over. So this is our current tile that we're going to be going through, which is just basically a road out of the community, out of Kilvington, into the forest, heading in a northerly direction. We'll assume it's morning. They're just starting out. They've got all their gear. They're all provisioned. So let's just follow the hex rules and just see if anything happens in the first part of the day. Now, what I'll do is I'll kind of divide the day and the hex tile into 4 sections, I think. So there'll be a morning movement, a lunch kind of phase, an afternoon movement and phase, and then the resting phase. So that'll give us 4 little opportunities for something to happen. Now, we may end up just blasting through hexes really quickly. If that happens, well, that's just the nature of the beast. And if it looks like there's going to be a lot of encounters, one after the other, then we'll just have to make sure that we work that into the story to make sure it makes sense. All right, so let's grab our hex rules, and we'll roll at the start of the day, and we'll just see what happens. Let's use a little bit of common sense at this point, and for the first part of the track through this tile, the morning part, I think we can assume that the area immediately surrounding the community is pretty well clear of anything. The local populace will be, making sure that, any creatures that are come in are not going to be detrimental to the community. The druids are looking after the place, they're preserving it. So for the first basically half of the day, there's no real interaction that the characters are going to get into. They're just going to be trekking along the road, getting to a point where they're going to stop and have a bit of lunch. We'll let them have a break and everything like that. I don't think there's any need to roll any of that. But maybe in the second part of the day, where they're getting a bit closer to the next community, or getting a bit closer to the edge of well, if it's the edge of the forest, we'll see. Maybe there's a bit more chance of something happening. So let's determine if there's an encounter or a feature or something that comes across in this second part of the day. And for that, we'll just consult the hex rules, and we'll just consult the features and events table, which is basically just rolling a d10 and seeing what the results are. So we've got a 4, and a 4 just says there's a settlement, a village, an outpost, or a fortress. So perhaps the first encounter that they'll have about asking if anything strange is going on is within that first day. It's less than a day's walk to the next village or the next little place of where people are living. We might make it, let's just make something up here. Let's just make it a little small outpost. There's a couple of houses, almost like an advanced, like a guard post kind of thing, a guard outpost, where it's just a bit of a couple of houses. There's a sentry or two, a little family, a bit of a farming area, just that, just for a bit of a heads up of people toing and froing along the road towards the village. So let's do some little character and NPC interactions at this particular outpost. All right, so let's grab some tables and roll up some characters and the name of the outpost. Okay, so I'm just going to use our random tables book. It's got a bunch of town names and things like that in it. It's got like 5 tables of 100. So I'm going to roll a d10 divided by 2 and get that to pick a table, and then I roll a d100, and that'll give us our outpost name. And I'll call it something, we'll give it something quaint, because it's not a full-on town or village. It's just going to be a little outpost. So let's just roll to see, roll the table, and then roll on the table and see what we get. Well, that's a 1, so that's on the first table. And then we'll just roll our, if I can find my 10-sided dice. There we go, 100-sided dice, sorry. We'll just roll a d100 and see what we get. Well, that is 79. So 79 on table 1 is Chillstone. So that's kind of a neat little name. So we'll just note it down. Chillstone. And because it's just an outpost, maybe we'll call it Chillstone. Maybe there's like a spring nearby. That's why the outpost is there, because there's always a good supply of water there. So we'll call it Chillstone Creek Outpost. That sounds pretty cool. And then living here, let's just roll a d6 for the sake of it. There's one person, one person here. Maybe it's just one sentry. There's like a rotating guard system where someone just comes out, spends a week there, and then it rotates off. All right, so let's just generate this NPC and see who it is. So we're going to just use another random tables book, and this one's an Inns and Taverns one, and it's just got a list of 100 patrons. And I'm just going to use that because it has their name and it has their ancestry as well. And it just makes it easier instead of going through a whole list of generating every NPC characteristic when we possibly don't need to. If we need to expand on this character later on, then we will. But for now, we're not going to worry about it. So I'm just going to roll D100 and see who we get. And that's a 21. And that gets us Boe. A gnome, a female gnome called Boe. So she is currently manning the outpost, and we'll just do a bit of interaction between her and the party. Alrighty, for half the day, the party has had a 4th character. No, Ordway, you should have stayed at home. You're not cut out for these kind of activities. All right, so the party knows that the outpost is coming along, And as they rock up to where the outpost is, they see Boe sitting on a trunk outside. It's the afternoon, so she could be having a bit of a smoko. She might have just been doing some rounds around the outpost, checking traps, things like that. Or she might just be bored because, there might not be much to do. We can assume that she knows the characters. She's part of the community, and I might reprint her and paint her up to match the theme of the community. I think that might be nice and something to do. But does she know that the party were coming along today? Does she really know what's going on? So what we'll do is we'll just roll on the oracle and see, does she know anything about what the party is about to embark on? Now, with the oracle, sometimes it's great to just try to refine your questions a little bit. If you have a really broad question to the oracle, it can sometimes be a bit hard to think of something that would fit. So if you make your questions a little bit narrow, I find it often helps me with defining what the answer is going to be. Some questions are just yes and no, and oracle questions, which are fairly simple. But yeah, just keep that in mind if you're playing your own games. Just try to keep your questions focused. That way, you're not spending ages trying to think of an answer. So she's sitting there on a log. She sees the party coming. She knows all the characters, but does she know why the party is coming? So let's just ask that question. And that has landed on a 1. And a 1 is a no and situation. So she has no idea why they're coming, and something else possibly is complicating that matter. Now also, it's a 1. So that means we need to roll on our oracle chain, our complication chains. And for a 1, we just roll on the minor complication chain. So we're just going to roll the complication dice, and if it's a 1, that dice then is advanced to a d4. It's a 5, so nothing happens. It stays as a d6. So there's no advancement on any minor complications yet. But as our party rock up, she's like, what are you guys doing here? I was told that there was going to be no traffic coming in or out for the next week or so. I have no idea why you guys are here. What's going on? So Lena's just basically explained to Boe that Ordway has tasked the party with trekking out to the nearest villages and communities to ask about, has there been any strange weather, or do they know anything about why the weather is getting increasingly weird? The tornado was very strange. Nothing like that has ever occurred in the forest before, and it just feels wrong. So yeah, they say that to Boe. Bo's like, oh, I don't know anything about it. I'm halfway through my shift here. I've been here for 3 days. I knew the tornado went through. I just bunkered down in the outpost hut. Had to repair the roof this morning. That was a pain. But yeah, look, I don't know anything about it. Now, the oracle has said there's a complication. So maybe the road ahead has been wrecked by the storm. There's some blocks in the way. There's some fallen trees. The track's all muddy. It's all sort of deteriorated. So Boe may say, just be careful. Well, if you're going ahead, just be careful because the road ahead is hazardous. There's some hazards ahead. I've cleaned it as best as I can, but I'm going to be sending a message back down to the community, back down to Kilvington, to say we need to get a work team up here and fix this up. Our party go, yep, no worries, thanks, Boe. We'll keep an eye out. If we can do a bit of cleaning on the way up or the way through, we might be able to spend a little bit of, like an hour or two, just cleaning up. But we need to get to we need to get moving because we're on this quest. What we'll do now is we'll say that we're now at the end of the hex crawl for the day. We've had a pretty ordinary sort of morning. We got up to the outpost. We met Boe. She's just warned them there's some hazards on the road ahead, some fallen material. Just be wary. It's very muddy and stuff like that. So when they get towards their resting phase, maybe what we can say is they get to a point where it's starting to get a little bit darker. There's a bit of like a resting area on the side of the road. And at that point, perhaps there's been a bunch of trees and things that have been blown over. And so the party decide to rest at this place. So what we can do is they haven't spent any resources. We're not going to worry about that. But what we might do is we might do a little bit of a night encounter, or we'll see if there's a night encounter. And that way, if there's anything happening during the night, or if they have a restful night. So the night encounters, let's grab our stuff here. Just rolling a D10. Oh, leave those there. Roll a D10, see if anything happens during the night. Now, just to note, any rolls that happen on the Hex Crawl rules do not affect the Oracle or the complications change. They're purely just for hex crawling. So let's see what happens during the night as they're camping overnight. And it's a 9, which I can tell straight away is a very good result. It's a good rest. So peaceful night, no dramas at all. They didn't even get any mozzie bites or anything like that. And they're given advantage on survival. So that means that just for the next day. So during the next day, if anything comes up that needs an advantage roll, like a survival check or a skill check on survival or anything like that, or if they come up upon some hardships that need to be dealt with in a survival way, they've got an advantage. They can roll with advantage on that. So I think what we might do is we might call it there. I know these episodes are kind of short, but I want to try and keep them short. So what we'll do is we'll just say they've spent their first day and night out in the forest. It's the next day, and what we'll do is at the start of the next session, we'll roll to see what the terrain does, what the biome does. We might roll on the weather perhaps, but then what we'll do is we'll just continue from that point. So I think, thanks for joining me today. Hopefully it's been entertaining. And by next week, hopefully, we'll be continuing. See you later.